influence of a modern painter in this work? Yes.
Rothko?
No. No. It's flat, as William Pardue, painter, a good painter, says, observed, it has planes. Now, when we think of planes, we often think of Cezanne. You go back to Cezanne, you have planes. Cubism, you have planes. But in 20th century art, no one here can think of two artists. Yes?
Diebenkorn.
Hopper. Absolutely. You think of those empty spaces in Hopper's works. Very lonely. Very isolated. One other painter.
Diebenkorn.
Anybody else? Milton Avery. Simplified.
No, then there's
I was looking for that in this particular work when I did it. I felt a need psychologically and emotionally to do that. And I did a number of paintings in that genre. Now, when you look at that painting, you don't feel what? Sensuality, do you?
No.
What do you experience?
Beauty.
Structure. There's no painterliness, there's no texture in it, there's very little movement in it. It's very quiet. And the fact that it has no occupants in there makes it even more strange, etc. Okay? So this was one direction that occurred. Then here is something called Green Flow. If any of you saw my show at the Heckscher Museum, the retrospective, a number of people here must have seen it. Okay. This is a painting that is 60 by 48 compared to something like this. It was one of the largest pieces I ever did. After leaving New York, my wife and I moved out to Huntington, okay? And I discovered the light was different, and there were things to paint that were very different than rooftops, buildings, seesaws in a park, etc. The beach, the tide, low tide, etc. The mud flats, etc. There's a movie here. Where's the movie?
We've watched it already
What?
in the front.
Yeah, in the front there's a movie by Peter Shear of what was happening at that time. I began to see possibilities of relating to seascapes. And when you look at this painting, you don't see color separated very, very distinctly. But what do you experience? You experience color blending, flowing, softly, etc. A totally different kind of approach, process to painting. Part of that approach, beside, and again you could say I was conscious of Rothko in that work, because there is some of that blending in it. But I also had begun to do pastels. I took my materials with me when I went to Greece and did a whole series of pastels and watercolors. I always worked in various mediums. Watercolor, pastels, acrylic, gouache, casein, pen and ink, charcoal, etc. And monotypes. I'll explain what a monotype is a little bit later. Would anybody like to ask a question, if they can see it, about that green flow? Yes.
I have that, one of your series. In fact, I took a
Oh, you
picture
have it
of
in
it.
there?
Yeah, I
Good,
do.
good,
I have it
Can
at
you
home.
blow it up so everybody can see it?
Yes,
There's actually one out here by the back entry that's from that same
Yeah,
period.
well, that's
too.
from
A very
Maine.
beautiful piece,
That's
yeah.
from Maine.
From Maine, yeah.
yeah.
But it's got
Yeah,
that
that's
same
good,
spirit.
Jean.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you come in, there's a painting
Yeah, I saw that.
which was sold that was done in Maine, and it was, I was
That's
using
this.
casein. Casein was a water-soluble medium I used at the beginning of my work outdoors. And then casein became a terrible, terrible paint. Raymond Shiva died. He was the owner of the paint. And the tubes of paint began to become very watery-like. But did you want to say something about?
No, just that I have that, and then you went very interestingly to the next transition of the
you
same
don't. Okay.
subject,
All right,
but you took it totally different,
yeah,
and you can see
Mhm.
what it is.
yes.
Stan, I'm wondering, when you use casein, as in this one and in one in the
Well,
back.
no, those,
Well,
there
there
are
are
no
two
other
caseins.
There are no other
It
casein
says-
paintings. The one in the front is the only one left of casein.
It
That
says
one
on
is-
the sheet,
Yeah.
casein, that's
Yeah.
what.
That one
this
is Maine,
Oh,
and the
there is
other,
one?
This is
And
Maine
there's
over
one
here.
in there that
Okay,
says
I beg
casein
your
too.
pardon. All right.
Okay, but, and I looked very closely, and I felt it was so like a watercolor.
Yeah,
And
it
I'm
is a-
wondering how it differs when you're moving casein color from watercolor, or are they very similar
Well-
when you thin down the?
Yeah, casein can have, it has substance. When you squeeze out, you see a bunch of paint. And you can use it very thickly, or you can use it transparently, like watercolor. That's the answer.
What makes you choose to use casein instead of watercolor? Can you get a stronger,
I don't know.
stronger
I
impression?
I think I heard about it, somebody may have told me about it. I began to use it when I was doing my MFA at Iowa, so that's when it happened, all right? Anybody else have any question about this? All right, now, this work here is from, it's called Pêche de Marne, which is a very small hamlet in the Midi-Pyrenees. How's my French, Carol? And I didn't do it, yes, I did it there in, let's see, 2002, all right? Now, if you look at what happened here, and what happens here, and even what happens here, why did that occur? Oh my God. Why did the surface become so active, so energetic, so wild, so full of gestures, so bright in color, so lacking in structure, all the opposites of this? Why did it happen? Yes.
You were in love.
Fresh wine.
Very good point. That's it. I love my sensuality. My sensuality. Now, when I was doing a painting like this, I was far back and looking in a distance. When I was doing a painting like this and this, I was looking at something right over here, close up to me, a patch somewhere where I could see the grass, where I could see flowers, where I'd see ferns, where I could see twigs, where I could see rocks, where I could see light so differently. When you paint something that is distant from you, you feel very detached. But when you paint something that's very close, you begin to feel like the things that are in there. Very, very much. So that change plus the vertical, okay? The vertical, the horizontal. The horizontal, the vertical. I began more and more to turn my canvas this way instead of this way, etc. Why did I do that? Why was I so intent on? Yes,
Creates more tension.
I couldn't hear
It
you.
creates more tension.
It creates more distance,
tension.
tension. Yes, in a way it does, but there is some other reason. Why does it create more tension?
It's just the way that you compose it. It's short, there's shorter strokes that go this way. Where you like to look at things this way makes us calm. This way it doesn't.
All right. In some ways, you're right. Another answer could be when you have horizontals. When you have horizontals, your tendency is to take your arm, look at the surface, and begin to move it this way. And you begin to repeat yourself, and you develop a rhythm. You can develop a very nice rhythm. Well, the painting in Maine was vertical in some way, and I did it that, but often I would repeat myself too much with horizontal strokes, with colors that were moving in the same direction. And I realized that. I caught myself, and then I decided I'm going to try verticals. It gave me more liberty to spread out and be conscious. Here's another thing that's very, very important about this painting. It's my consciousness of the entire surface became more and more a part of my process in doing that. All right? Now, I'd like to read you, I don't know how many of you have this catalog from the retrospective. How many people have this? Okay. You should go, I asked you to go tomorrow, go to the Heckscher Museum. And if you live near the Heckscher Museum, which is on Prime Avenue, not far from Huntington Village, and ask for this catalog. Because there is a beautiful essay by Hilary Sheets. Is a correspondent for Art News, which comes out every month. And if you are a painter, I would advise you to look at it, because you can come upon some very interesting articles, contemporary, modern, historical, etc. Plus wonderful Xerox reproductions, color reproductions. Okay. As a young man from Brooklyn, the Army, as a young man from Brooklyn, in the Army, deployed for combat in France during World War II, Stan Brodsky made a life-changing discovery when his platoon came upon a deserted farmhouse. As other infantrymen ransacked the contents for valuables, Brodsky stupidly found a small box of watercolors with a tiny brush that he tucked into his gas mask. He had always had a talent and interest in drawing, but had never painted. During the periods of relief from the battlefront, Brodsky taught himself at night by candlelight to manipulate fluid watercolors, illuminating his letters back home with expression of new votes. I should use it. He was experiencing of new vistas he was experiencing across France and Germany. It was the beginning of what would become a long, productive career in painting and teaching. Something of the excitement and freshness of response to shifting environments and emotions that characterized Brodsky's novice experiments has remained consistent in his painting over the decades, even as his work has evolved from depicting the exterior world to a more interior territory. That's a very important point, toward a more interior territory. Now this last paragraph. Over the last 2 decades, Brodsky has pushed further into the physical and psychological terrain of abstract expressionism. He made a conscious decision to shift his paintings to a vertical orientation, further playing against any suggestion of a horizon line. While his experience of nature remains a catalyst, the particular quality of sparkling sun and water in Santa Barbara, the violet of the native flowers in Abiquiu, that's in Arizona, the greens of the olive and cypress trees of Tuscany, it is distilled in a fluid choreography of tonal relationships, shapes, and gestures. He fights against forms, becoming too referential, using overlays of color and activating the surface with accent marks applied with paint stick that are a kind of drawing. Brodsky first experimented with such abstracted characters in a series from the late 1990s called Hebraic Fragments, inspired by a trip to Prague. He has since come to think of these glyphs as an extension of the movement of his arm that help orchestrate the flow of energy through a painting. Well, there's a lot there, and I hope some of you will ask me questions about what it is you may have absorbed or something you want to enlarge upon, etc. Yes.
It reminds me, those words that you spoke, of the words that Kandinsky spoke, where you're following an inner necessity with your abstract expressionism, and then moving your arm, like the action painting of Pollock.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
It's like a
Yeah.
combination
Yeah. Yeah.
of those two thought processes.
Yes. Well, the word necessity is a word that comes out very often.
Yeah, the inner necessity.
And the inner necessity.
He wrote about
Yes.
that.
Kandinsky said art is an expression of inner necessity.
Yeah.
And his book is wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's true. That's the thing that happens. I'm glad you brought it up. Somehow finding a way which was yours alone. When I studied painting at under the MFA program at Iowa, there were very good teachers there, and there were painters there, and so on. I took life drawing, I took painting, I took etching, I took sculpture. But in doing paintings, learning about the material itself, which was very valuable, and how to use it, no one taught me anything about color. Nothing. Nothing about color whatsoever. When they would criticize the work, they might look at it and say, well, this is too small, this doesn't fit well, these shapes are awkward, etc., etc. The first painting that I ever tried to do when I transferred from my Bachelor of Journalism in Missouri to Iowa. At Missouri, I had taken courses, just introductory courses in painting, design, and life drawing. When I got to Iowa, people were painting twice as large as the students in Missouri. That was the university that revered Thomas Hart Benton, the painters of realism, of representation, etc. So the first painting I wanted to try was an experience I had. I walked down the town of Columbia one day. It was a sunny, beautiful morning. I was walking thoughtfully, dreamlike, and I looked across the other side, and there was a church, a small church. And all of a sudden, I saw in the shadows of the church a group of people coming out from a funeral. And here I was, in my youth, 24 years old, and I see this procession of people. And I thought it was really, geez, this would make a great painting. Because here I am alive, and the light is shining on me. So I go back to my teacher, try my first painting at Iowa, and I explained to him just what I said to you. So he said, go ahead, do it. How am I going to do it? I struggled with that idea for like 3 weeks, and then gave up completely. I know it was a good idea, but I didn't know how, in any way, to represent that meaning which I had experienced, that sensation which I had experienced. I didn't know anything about color. I didn't know anything about space. I didn't know anything about movement. All the things that had escaped me when I was in the introductory courses at Missouri. It was not that was a gigantic challenge, and I couldn't do it. So I struggled. And at Iowa, I began to do landscapes. I did not do figurative work at all when I was at Iowa, etc. After that, I went to a year or 6 months after that, I went to Paris, stayed there for a couple of months, 7 months, and came back again. And then I began trying to become a painter, etc. And then, of course, teaching became a part of my entire existence as a way of getting me time to step aside and put hours away, have a studio somewhere, etc., etc. I remember one of the first places I had as a studio was a place on the east side of New York. It was Avenue A and East 6th Street. And I had 4 rooms for $95. But in this little apartment, when you were in the kitchen and stepped back, you were in another room, just like that. It was like a box. And all of a sudden I hear the clothing coming. I look out the window, and across the way there was another building. A lady was hanging out a wash. It was so funny, and it was so tight, but that was my first studio. It took me a while before I began to find my way. And one of the things that happened after I got married, etc., was in New York City at that time, on 10th Street. This was in 1960, when who were the painters who were leading the pack? Pollock, de Kooning, Rothko, Klein, so. And on 10th Street, between Park Avenue and 3rd Avenue, there were about 12 galleries, and every 2 weeks they would have an open house, and we would all look. We would go from one gallery to another gallery to another gallery. Eventually I found myself a studio in one of those 10th Street buildings and began to paint, so on. And it was a very slow process, struggling process. I still didn't know where I was going. I did some works which were from the figure, from my family, etc. And then the move to Huntington occurred in 1965 with my wife, and we eventually had 2 children. And then I began to go outside and start painting outdoors and discovering Cold Spring Harbor. If any of you have been to Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, you know how beautiful it is, the water, the beach, the view, everything. And I went around with my materials and studied places in Northport, in Centerport, and in Huntington. And then eventually I began to travel. After I got divorced, I began to travel. We had 2 children, they were small, and I traveled to Greece, I traveled to France, and then with my second wife, Jean, I traveled to Sicily, I traveled to England, and then before that I traveled to New Mexico, and then I traveled to Arizona. So what I'm saying when I mention a place that I traveled to is that I was painting the low tide so well that the first show I had at the Heckscher Museum in 1975, there were 30 paintings in one gallery, 30 paintings that were not very large. I sold 25 of them because they were paintings that were soft and blended and recognizable of landscape. They were not paintings like this, or like this, or like that, okay? So following that period, I gradually began to move toward what I would call more painterliness in terms of the things I use, and also began to do figures of my family, of my son, and my mother and father. These were also subjects that I turned to. Finally, in the light work, the urge to become more gestural became a very important tool. And I picked up what was known as paint stick. Now, paint stick is simply a stick that has rosin and linseed oil, and you can use it like a crayon and work all over with your arm. You can use it while the surface is wet or where the surface is dry. And it has lots of possibilities in doing it. You can make rough lines, you can make smooth lines, you can do many, many things, and it has a range of color, which is so important to me in getting different kinds of color. Cobalt turquoise, violets of all kinds, reds of all kinds, yellows of all kinds. You know, I tried it. And the other thing that began to cover in my painting was more use of contrast, a greater degree of contrast, a greater degree of separation. And also, I began to, there are no examples here, I began to use the edges. I began to leave the edges blank sometimes, leave them scrawly, and to find ways of creating tension between, in this one I didn't do it, but in creating tensions between parts of the canvas and edges of the canvas, etc. Now, a painting like this is done in Brittany. We went to Brittany in 2010, I believe. And there were wonderful bushes of various kinds there, and the light was brilliant. And I had acrylic paints, and I used a paper this size, and I used my brushes, which were wide or thin, etc. I did this painting probably in about an hour. Now, when I look at the landscape, I'm close to it. I don't think about wanting to reproduce it. I don't want to make a copy of it in any way. I want it to be able to affect me internally. So I internalize what I feel. And then I start to work with strokes, such as these black ones over there. I use what is known as underpainting, which you see it over here, the yellow areas for the underpainting, and then I would do overlapping. Overlapping of colors is another process that began to appear in my work a great deal. And the movements also, very, very important, accentuating the movements, etc. And also how the light itself was changing or affecting what I was looking at. Now, when I went back to my studio with these set of paintings that I had done in Brittany, do you think I wanted to take out those paintings and copy them? Do you think that was my objective?
No.
Would I do that? I would never do that, because I once tried to do it. I once tried to enlarge a painting that was that size onto a larger canvas. It was a total failure. So I had internalized my visit to Brittany from various places I had visited. And it was from that internalization that paintings came out in terms of fresh colors, new relationships, new movements, new exaggerations, etc. This was a springboard for those paintings in oil paint and in pasting, so on. I think, yeah,
It sounds like you have enabled yourself and trained yourself to get to such an inner
yeah.
part
yeah.
that it sounds almost like a meditation when you're painting.
It
Could
sounds
you-
like what?
Like a meditation.
A meditation?
Is it something like that, the feeling of it?
I don't meditate. I don't meditate when I paint.
Could you
Uh,
talk about the role of music when you paint?
Well, that's in the studio. In the studio, I do put on classical music. And sometimes I feel like I'm dancing on clouds. I remember one time there was a movement from the Dvorak's Seventh Symphony. It was kind of a waltz. And I was so affected by it while I was painting. I was going, I didn't try to follow the movement itself, but it just gave me such a rhythmic feeling about it that I couldn't believe it. I think it's hard to say what things, I think, for example, when you paint outside, you have to be selective in what you see. If you want to reproduce what you see, forget about it, don't go outside. You'll be dead duck for what you look at. You'll be frustrated like crazy about what you're painting. You have to select what affects me the most. The light, the colors, the textures, the rhythms of things that are crossing each other, etc. So on. Now, did you have a question?
Sure.
Yes.
Painting behind you.
Oh, this one.
Do you think you could
Yeah.
talk a
Pardon?
little bit about, do you think you could talk a little bit about the structure of the painting, how it relates to movement,
Yeah.
how it relates to light, especially how it relates to movement? Do you mind?
Well, this painting, strangely enough, is dated 1985. It's very, very interesting because in 1985, I think this is really one of a kind that came out. And I did this painting when I went to a residence called the Virginia Center for Creative Arts. It's a beautiful place. I've been to Yaddo, which is another one, and I've been to McDowell. All of them are good. But the food at Yaddo is the best. So, well, for example, in Virginia, the soil in Virginia is very rust-like. I exaggerated it with the red, but it had a reddish kind of glow to it. And I didn't paint it looking at a specific landscape. I did some paintings on paper, and then I went back to the studio in Virginia and painted it there. And I didn't use any paint stick then because I wasn't using it. I used different shades of brushes. I knew that I wanted to get away from flatness, number one. I wanted to try to use strokes that were large and animated. I didn't want to animate the surface. I wanted it to move. But the other thing is, the distance is not there. I didn't want distance in this painting. As it occurs, let's say, in the tennis court and the one below. I wanted the surface itself to become very animated and move. I wanted movements that went this way, this way, this way. I was very conscious of doing that. This is done by a drip. When I did that, took my brush and I went like that. I flipped it like that. I didn't do it too many times, but that's what I did. A lot of painters get drips by doing, this is let the paint run and get that kind of freedom and so on. There's also a combination here of very, I don't know if you can see it, but there are areas here. Move this way.
Take the whole machine.
Thank you.
Put it in there.
Now, this is almost pure color, right here, unadulterated. But over here, I have a green here, an underpainting green. And this same color right here has been lightened by doing two things. By using white with the color, it was a reddish color, and putting more linseed oil into it so it became transparent. And then I used some soft, transparent strokes, but let some of the green flow through. And that's called overlapping of color. So I combine my directness, because this was painted directly with the first strokes of mineral spirits or paint thinner right on the canvas. I didn't touch it. Sometimes when I start a painting, I always use the mineral spirits to thin out the colors. And there are things that happen in the first 10 minutes that are astonishing. And if I could only stop myself in 20 minutes, I would have about 40 more paintings. When I keep on going, I keep on pushing it, and when you push it too much, it starts to lose the freshness that you had. So the kids had it here. This is also directly, these strokes here, thinned out directly on the canvas. So over here, I did leave that, but over here, I built it up with lots of white in this color, and this color, again, with a different value. Colors have three things. They have the hue, which is the name of the color, and then you have the value, which is called either light or dark, either by using black or white or some other color. And then you have the reflective radiance of the color itself. So those three things are part of using color and finding its possibilities. And there's another thing that is very important in this painting. If I take away this from the painting, what would happen? If I put it somewhere else, what would happen? Yes.
The focus shifts.
Huh?
The focus of the painting shifts, no?
Pardon?
The focus. The focus.
The focus shifts. Yes, but there is no, remember this, there is no center of interest anymore in terms of painting. That word is dead, and the word balance is dead. What painting has and what this has, in contemporary painting especially, is movements that occur all over in different directions. Twisting, turning, overlapping, yes.
You're describing harmony too. If you took away the yellow, it would disturb the harmony.
You're right, you're right. Well, there wasn't, I wouldn't say there would be much, if, this harmony, this was a very slight harmony. If you're using the word harmony to describe, I would think the green would destroy the harmony already over there on the left. Right there. That's
But
interesting.
you need that to subdue the yellow, so the yellow would be carried through
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the triangle.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you're right. But the most important, probably the most important stroke is that yellow there.
Yeah.
And here's the question about color. When people ask you about color, the question you have to go over in your mind is, where am I going to place it? How large should it be? How brilliant should it be? Etc. What should it be next to? Etc. Those are things that you have to feel. Should it be painterly? Should it be textured? Etc. So that comes up. Yes?
Do you ever think about, so you talked about the surface. Do you ever talk about coming forward from the surface?
Well, I wanted to keep the surface. And from then, from the 80s on, my paintings do not have great distance. They have, even the one behind you, for example, that has shapes in it. But there is very little, there is some distance in the right-hand corner. Here's the thing too about paint. Yellows, oranges, reds will project more quickly, depending on what it is next to, than violet, blue, and green. There's a difference. They recede. Now, why do they recede? Because the wavelengths that reflect on the colors are much faster in the reds and oranges and yellows and the whites than they are in the greens, the blue, and the violets. That too is true.
Yeah, it seems like that yellow
You like
brings
that?
the purples forward.
Right.
Without the
But
yellow, the purples
yeah,
go back,
right,
the
right,
yellows bring
yes,
all the
it
purples
pushes-
forward.
Pushes that back. Here's another thing about the color. You have to feel sometimes that if I had too much red, this painting would feel very warm, too warm. But in order to cool it off with this, and this, and this, and this, those are things that are very important. Without that, the painting would be monotonous. It wouldn't work as well. Because color projects a feeling of density, of warmth, or a feeling of, if you wish, of coolness, etc. Any other questions? Yes?
Stan, as you're describing the thought process
Yeah,
when you're doing your painting,
yeah.
I find it hard to think that you're thinking as you're painting. When I look at your painting, I don't have any idea of your thought process. I see it emotionally. I see how it affects me. And I wonder if you have the same feeling. Are you really thinking about it as much as you indicate?
Well, the word thinking kind of, the more you can dull your thinking, the more you can stop editing what you put down, the better off it will be, it turns for me. Because I try to do what Paul Clay said, taking a line for a walk. Isn't that a great passage? Taking a line for a walk. That means that empathy plays a tremendous role in wanting to get to the essence of your feelings. Sure, emotions are colored, etc., etc. But if you start thinking, you're judging what you've done. And that judging can be very, very damaging, because it then begins to, you begin to ask yourself questions that come up which are not helpful in deciding. They are thoughts, but they don't, they rupture the process of being in the work. That's what happens. That's what occurs. Now, I'm not saying I'm dead drunk when I paint, but I would rather allow myself to be embellished with what's going on so completely, if I could do it. I say that. Now, I just want to thank you for that question. You asked me that a couple more times. I'd like to tell you about the monotypes, okay? All right. How many of you don't know what a monotype is? Everybody here knows what a monotype is? Yeah. All right. Geez, I thought everybody would not know what a monotype is. All right. He also has enjoyed the serendipity of the monotype process, in which he paints on plexiglass. You choose a size plexiglass that you want to have, a square or a rectangle, and makes impressions on moistened archival paper while the sheet is still wet It has to be, the paper has to be moist. It's still wet. And then, while the sheet is still wet with color, it'll often run through. Well, what happens is you put the plexiglass on the bed of the of the printing press, and then what do you paint on the plexiglass? What are you thinking of a specific scene? No, not me. I'm using the colors. I go completely blank with planning. Planning is out of the question, absolutely. I just start with the colors and use strokes or use my fingers, etc. Okay, and then you take the sheet of white paper and you squeegee it off on the wall, and then you put it in the press and you lay it over the plexiglass. And while the sheet is still wet with color, he'll often turn it through the printing press again. That means that I can make one impression very quickly, but then when that is over, I can take the plexiglass out. I can either clean it off or take a new sheet of plexiglass, the same size, and make another set of colors occurring on that. And then I take the sheet which I put in the edge of the printing press, I spray it with some more water, I put that new plexiglass relationship down, and the colors which are on the plexiglass, which are on the sheet that was run through, you put that over the plexiglass again, and those first colors will mix with the impression, will mix with the new plexiglass on running the printing press through. And what happens is, through the printing press again, to make additional impressions with freshly painted plexiglass, realizing unforeseen, this is a word that's so important, realizing unforeseen color mixes, and translucent layers suggesting a great depth, as the round yellow, a painting called the round yellow. Now, here's the thing. I don't think about what it will be when I'm doing plexiglass, that process I described. But I will be then after. But I don't think about what it will be, but I think about what I will be after the impression. Now, think about what I just said. I don't think about what it will be, what kind of design, what subject, a real, whatever it may be. But instead, I'm only concerned, what will I be after the impression, the second impression is made? That's the point. Okay?
Stan,
Yes.
we have four
Yeah.
of your monoprints here.
Yeah, right. 4 monotypes. So I think we've come almost to the end here, unless you have been a great audience.
Here's a question right here.
How do you know when you're done? And
Oh, that's a killer question. I have destroyed more paintings by going back again after working on them for several hours and finding that something is wrong here a little bit. So I start fiddling with it, you know? It gets so precious, it destroys the whole painting. I think there is no real answer to that. Nobody can tell you when it's done. I think the best thing is, if you're not sure, to leave it, if it's resolved, is to leave it alone and come back the next day and look at it again and see what you feel should be done. Yes?
Stan, I have an answer to that question.
Yes.
When my students ask me that, I tell them, when the next thing you can think to do will not improve it, it's finished.
Very good. It's a very good question.
There's one other technique also.
That's good.
When you think, well, maybe need something, put it in a frame and look at it in a frame. A frame gives a feeling of being finished and it says, okay, that's all right.
That's possible. But I have one other answer to that. I really feel that when you look at your painting, if you have fuss with there's one area down here or one area down here, but you haven't looked at the total effect of what you made, then you are really going to be in trouble. That's what happens. The total effect of the interaction of the things you put down. For me, yes. Yes.
Robert Henry said, you know when you're done when you've said what you wanted to say.
Yeah.
What are you trying to say?
Well, I read that book too, but I don't remember it. I like that book. Yeah. What am I trying to say? It's a mystery. I couldn't describe it. I could say, okay, this is a landscape of my interpretation of nature. That's all I could say. I mean, I can't describe it as something that has hostility or is grotesque, like other painters may have grotesque imagery, or whether it is something dealing with figurative aspects, because there are no figurative aspects.
It's always about man's inhumanity.
Pardon?
Oh, man's inhumanity. I know when I'm done, when I look at it, whatever I'm creating, I'm generally an oil painter, 15 feet away, and when I hold it up in front of a mirror.
That's very good too.
Yeah, and if I smile, when I hold it up in front of a mirror, I'm done.
If you scowl, it's not done.
If I scowl, it's not done.
Well, here's a friend of mine who works at the Heckscher Museum. When I had the retrospective at the Heckscher Museum, he was a guard there. And one day a man came over and was looking at this painting, which is called Santa Barbara. It's called Santa Barbara 5, number 5, 2002, oil on canvas, 60 by 48. It's owned by a collector. So he was looking at the painting, and he asked my friend, why is it called Santa Barbara? I don't see anything there that connects with Santa Barbara. So he says, I don't see any buildings, I don't see any golf course, I don't see any water. Why is it called Santa Barbara? He was befuddled. So my friend tried to explain to him that this was a expression of someone who had visited this particular place in the United States and fell in love with all the beauty of what I had seen and had painted it, so on. Now, I just had the word beauty. Okay. There is a philosopher named Arthur Danto, who no longer believes, and he says, beauty is not something that contemporary painters are interested in achieving in their work. And that is true. If you are a painter who works for beauty in your work, which is very pleasing, like those of Matisse, for example. Matisse wanted people to feel that the paintings that he made would make people who came home from work could sit down and feel like a good armchair. That's what he said in his notes. But today, painting is a word, beauty is a word that is for those people who are very radical, do not believe in beauty. Yeah, that's true. They believe in something else.
Stan,
Yes.
I'm a pacifist.
Pardon?
I'm a pacifist.
Yes.
I brought my children up
Yeah.
to be pacifists.
Yes.
My younger son joined the Air Force.
Yes.
Then we went to war. My anguish and my rage that he would be put in the situation
Of killing people.
of killing people.
Hmm.
I made a painting. It was a very angry painting. I painted on glass, and then I put the background on
Yeah.
after I finished the painting. I look at it today, and I can still
Feel
feel
anguish.
the anguish.
That means you're satisfied what you wanted to do,
Yes.
and you did something very, very excellent in achieving it. Using certain colors to set a mood, which would be very important. I've never done a painting about war, even though I was in combat. I never did, because I had no desire to do it. I do have one feeling about painting that, not just war, but paintings that are made about current events. They become, after a while, let's say 20 years later, or 25 years later, they become old age, because we are no longer living in that time. So I've always tried to escape that fact of doing something. I'd rather do something that concerns myself and where I am than think about eternity and so on. But I understand what you say. I thank you for that.
Yes, Dan? I was thinking about what you said about beauty.
About what?
About beauty.
Beauty.
And, you know, often when I look at your paintings, I feel a sense of beauty in them. And when you're making them, and when you're looking at the work, does the word beauty enter your studio at all? Do you look at it and you say
I
that?
lock my door so it doesn't come
You
in.
don't let it in? But don't you feel that, you know, I certainly think you achieve beauty.
I would say,
It's a response.
if anybody said that painting is pretty, I would clap them in the jaw. Beauty is okay, but when a painting starts to get pretty, then it becomes sweet. And this is something that happens to Renoir. Renoir has so many terrible paintings that are so sweet and lovely. I mean, he just did them. That's the way he worked. His great painting in the museum in Washington with the people who are dancing around. I forget the name of the museum.
Phillips.
Pardon?
The Phillips.
Right, okay. It's a marvelous painting. He did some marvelous work. But when he began to do those nudes, which were like Rubens again, you know, with more weight, they were horrible. So I would say you could make a painting that could be beautiful. But what is beautiful? Is it the way the painting is painted? Is it the subject matter? Is it the way the painter used the paint? See, I mean, those are things that can affect our senses. So I say don't lose it if you feel that way about it.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Shall we dismiss the class?